think you know what isolation feels like? Try living in a cabin 12 miles past the snow line, where the only sound for weeks is the wind trying to peel your roof off like the lid of a tin can, where the thermometer hasn't climbed above zero in 43 days, where the nearest human being is a 3-hour hike through drifts deep enough to swallow a truck. Ember Ashwood knew isolation the way most people knew their own reflection. The cabin sat at the edge of Aspen Ridge, Colorado, perched on a granite shelf that overlooked a valley so deep and white it looked like the inside of a frozen lung. It was January 15th, and the thermometer nailed to the porch read 20 degrees below zero. The wood stove was roaring. The windows were frosted thick enough that Ember couldn't see outside without scraping ice away with her fingernails. She was 22 years old. She had been alone for 4 years, and she had convinced herself that this was safety. Ember pressed her forehead against the cold glass, her breath fogging the small circle she'd cleared. Beyond the window, the world was erasing itself. The blizzard had been building for 2 days, and now it was here in full force. A wall of white that swallowed trees, boulders, the horizon itself. The wind screamed through the valley with a sound like 1,000 wolves howling in unison. She pulled her wool shawl tighter around her shoulders. The fabric was thin, in places patched with mismatched thread. Everything she owned was like that, salvaged, mended, stretched to its breaking point, and then stretched a little further. The radio on the shelf crackled with static. She'd been listening to the NOAA Weather Channel all day. The meteorologist's voice was calm, clinical, detached. Blizzard warning remains in effect for the Central Rockies. Wind gusts up to 70 miles per hour. Visibility near zero. Travel is impossible and extremely dangerous. This is a life-threatening storm. Do not attempt to leave your shelter. Ember switched it off. She didn't need a stranger in Denver to tell her what the wind was already screaming. She moved to the stove, lifting the cast-iron poker to stir the coals. Heat radiated against her face, fierce and almost painful. The cabin was small. One room with a loft for sleeping, a kitchenette that consisted of a hand-pump sink and a 2-burner camp stove, and shelves crammed with books. Medical textbooks, veterinary manuals, wilderness survival guides, meteorology, topography, anything she could find in the abandoned ranger station 15 miles south. Knowledge was the only currency that mattered when you were invisible. And Ember Ashwood had spent 4 years making herself invisible. She stirred a pot of rabbit stew, the smell rich and gamey. She'd trapped the rabbit 2 days ago before the storm hit. The meat would last her a week if she was careful. The vegetables were canned, salvaged from a supply cache she'd buried near the old trapper's trail. She had 53 escape routes mapped out in her head, 53 ways to vanish if someone came looking. Because someone was always looking. Not for her specifically, not anymore, but for wolves like her, rogue omegas, defective bloodlines. Wolves who didn't fit into the pack structure, who couldn't shift properly, who were weak. Wolves who were liabilities. Ember ladled stew into a chipped ceramic bowl and sat at the small wooden table. The chair creaked under her weight. She was thin, too thin, her collarbone sharp beneath the neck of her sweater. Her hair was long and tangled, the color of dark honey shot through with streaks of copper. She kept it braided down her back because it was easier than trying to manage it. Her eyes were brown, dull, ordinary brown, the kind of brown that disappeared in a crowd, except when she was alone, there was no crowd to disappear into. She ate slowly, methodically. Food was fuel, nothing more. And then she heard it, a sound that didn't belong to the wind. Ember froze spoon halfway to her mouth. She tilted her head, listening. The wind howled. The stove crackled. And beneath it, faint but unmistakable, was a sound that made her wolf, dormant and silent for so long, suddenly prick its ears inside her chest. A whimper, high-pitched, desperate, terrified, followed by a low guttural growl, the kind a mother makes when she's trying to keep her young from panicking. Ember set the spoon down. Her hands were shaking. She shouldn't go out there. Rule number 1 of survival as a rogue was simple: do not get involved. Curiosity killed wolves faster than wolfsbane. Altruism was a luxury she couldn't afford, but the sound came again. Closer this time. A yelp of pain, sharp and breathless. Ember stood. She grabbed her heavy parka from the hook by the door, shoving her arms into the sleeves. Her boots were lined with rabbit fur, thick enough to keep frostbite at bay for maybe an hour. She wrapped a scarf around her face, grabbed the iron poker from beside the stove, and unbolted the door. The wind hit her like a fist. She staggered backward, boots skidding on the icy porch. The cold was so intense it felt like her lungs were being scraped raw from the inside. Snow blasted her face, stinging like needles. Visibility was maybe 10 feet. Beyond that, the world was a churning white void. Hello, she screamed into the storm. Her voice was swallowed instantly. She squinted into the chaos. And then she saw it, a shape, 20 yards away near the woodpile, collapsed in the snow. Ember pushed forward every step a fight against the wind. Her legs burned. Her face went numb. She couldn't feel her fingers around the poker. When she reached the shape, her heart stopped. It was a wolf, a she-wolf, silver fur matted with ice and blood. She was massive, easily 100 pounds, with the lean, muscular build of a high-ranking wolf. A deep gash ran along her flank, the edges blackened and oozing. The smell hit Ember like a slap. Wolfsbane. Someone had clawed this wolf with poison. Curled against the she-wolf's belly, trembling so violently they looked like they were vibrating, were two pups. Tiny, maybe 4 weeks old. Their fur was pure white, downy and soft. Their eyes were squeezed shut against the cold. The mother wolf looked up at Ember. Her eyes were gold, but the color was fading, dimming to a dull yellow. She didn't growl. She didn't bare her teeth. She just looked at Ember with an expression that shattered something deep in Ember's chest. Please. The wolf nudged the pups toward Ember with her snout. A silent plea. A command. A mother's last desperate act. Take them. Leave me. Ember dropped the poker. Her hands moved on instinct. She scooped up the two pups, shoving them inside her parka against her chest. They were freezing, like blocks of ice. Their tiny hearts fluttered against her ribs, frantic and weak. No, Ember said, her voice cracking. You're coming too. The silver wolf whined. She tried to stand, but her back legs buckled. She collapsed back into the snow, panting in wet, ragged gasps. Ember looked at the cabin, then at the wolf, then at the storm. This was insane. This was suicide. This wolf weighed more than she did. The wind was strong enough to knock her off her feet. The cold would kill them both in minutes. But Ember Ashwood had spent 4 years surviving alone because someone had told her she was too weak to matter. And she was done believing that. She grabbed the wolf by the scruff of the neck and the loose skin of her shoulder. She hauled with everything she had. The wolf was dead weight, limp and unresponsive. Ember's muscles screamed. Her boots slipped on the ice. She fell once, hitting her knee so hard she tasted blood. She got up. She pulled. Step by agonizing step, she dragged the dying wolf through the snow. The pups squirmed inside her coat, their tiny claws digging into her skin. Her vision blurred. Her lungs burned. Her hands went numb, but she didn't stop. 20 yards. 15. 10. The porch steps were the worst. She had to lift the wolf, leverage her weight against the railing. Something in her shoulder popped. Pain flared white-hot down her arm. She kicked the door open, dragged the wolf inside, slammed the door shut behind them, and then she collapsed. Ember lay on the floor, gasping for air. Her whole body was shaking. The pups wriggled out of her coat, tumbling onto the rug. They were whimpering, high-pitched and pitiful. The silver wolf was motionless by the door, her breathing shallow and wet. Ember forced herself to sit up. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely grip the edge of the table. She looked at the wolf, at the pups, at the blood pooling on her floor. Okay, she whispered. Okay, we're not dying tonight. She moved with the efficiency of someone who had taught herself medicine from books in desperation. She dragged every blanket she owned to the floor by the stove, piling them into a makeshift nest. She hauled the silver wolf onto the blankets, her muscles screaming in protest. The wound on the wolf's flank was bad, worse than bad. The flesh was blackened around the edges, the skin hot and swollen. Ember could see bone. The smell of infection was thick and sour. Wolfsbane poisoning. If she didn't act fast, the wolf would be dead by morning. Ember grabbed her first aid kit from the shelf. It wasn't much. Alcohol, clean towels, a sewing needle, fishing line. She'd used it to stitch up her own injuries more times than she cared to count. She poured alcohol over the wound. The wolf jerked a low whine escaping her throat, but she didn't wake. Ember worked by the light of the fire. She cleaned the wound as best she could, cutting away the necrotic tissue with a knife she'd sterilized in the flames. Her hands were steady now, focused. She'd read 43 veterinary textbooks. She'd practiced sutures on rabbit pelts. She could do this. She threaded the needle with fishing line and began to stitch. The wolf's breathing hitched with every pass of the needle, but she didn't wake. Ember worked quickly, pulling the edges of the wound together, tying off each stitch with practiced precision. When she was done, she wrapped the wound in clean cloth and sat back, her hands slick with blood. The pups were huddled in the corner, whimpering. Ember turned her attention to them. They were too young to shift, too young to regulate their own body temperature. She heated milk on the stove, testing the temperature against her wrist the way she'd read in a childcare book she'd found years ago. She fed them with an eyedropper, one slow drop at a time. They latched onto the dropper with desperate little sucking sounds, their tiny paws kneading the air. By the time she was done, it was 3 in the morning. The fire was crackling. The pups were asleep in a pile of fur and blankets. The silver wolf's breathing had steadied, though she was still unconscious. Ember sat in her rocking chair, a mug of coffee in her hands. Her whole body ached. Her shoulder throbbed. Her hands were stained with blood. But they were alive. All of them. She stared at the silver wolf, and for the first time she really looked. The city's eye, the noble bone structure, the thick lustrous fur. This wasn't a rogue. This wasn't a low-ranking wolf. This was highborn. Ember set down her coffee and moved closer. She knelt beside the wolf, gently parting the fur behind her ear. And there it was, a tattoo. Small, black, a crescent moon intersected by a jagged lightning bolt. Ember's breath caught in her throat. She knew that crest. Every rogue knew that crest. It was whispered about in the underground networks, in the safe houses, and the black markets. The Silver Fang Pack, the royal family of the Northwest Territory. And if the stories were true, their alpha was a wolf named Thorn Silvercrest, 29 years old, Alpha King for 11 years since his parents' brutal assassination. A wolf so powerful, so deadly, that even the mention of his name made lesser alphas bow their heads. Ember sank back on her heels, her mind racing. She had just saved a member of the royal family. She had brought them into her cabin. She had stitched up a highborn wolf with fishing line and whiskey. And if there was one thing she knew about alpha wolves, it was that they always came for what was theirs. The wind howled outside, rattling the loose shingle on the roof. The fire crackled. The pups slept. And Ember Ashwood, who had spent 4 years making herself invisible, realized that she had just made the biggest mistake of her life. Or the luckiest. She didn't know which yet. The storm raged for hours. Ember didn't sleep. She sat by the fire watching the silver wolf breathe, watching the pups twitch in their sleep. Her mind wouldn't stop spinning. She closed her eyes and the memories came flooding back. Uninvited. Unwanted. She was 5 years old. Her mother, Era, was brushing her hair by the fireplace in their old cabin. Era was beautiful, gentle, kind. She smelled like lavender and wood smoke. And then there was Victor. Victor Thornwell, her stepfather. The man who had married her mother when Ember was 4. The man who had taken over the Blackwood Pack when her real father died. Victor was tall and broad-shouldered with gray streaked through his black hair. He smiled when other wolves were watching. But when it was just Ember and her mother, the smile disappeared. Ember remembered the tonic. Victor insisted she drink it every morning, a thick, bitter liquid that made her stomach cramp and her head spin. "It's for your condition," he'd said, his voice smooth and patient. "You're a weak Omega Ember. Your wolf is defective. This will help you grow strong." She drank it because she trusted him, because her mother told her to. And then when Ember was 6, her mother went on a hunting trip and never came back. Victor said it was an accident, a rock slide. Tragic. Unavoidable, but Ember remembered the way her mother had looked at Victor the night before she left. The fear in her eyes. The way she'd hugged Ember too tight, like she knew she might not come back. Years later, Ember would understand. Her mother had discovered something. Something about Victor's vitamins. Something about the Omega trafficking network he was running with 5 other alphas. Era had been going to expose him. So Victor killed her, made it look like an accident, and continued poisoning Ember for another 12 years. Ember had tried to shift for the first time when she was 7. Every young wolf shifted for the first time between 6 and 8. It was a rite of passage, a moment of pride. But when Ember tried, nothing happened. Her bones ached, her skin burned, but her wolf stayed silent, trapped, dormant. Victor called her defective, broken, a waste of resources. The pack believed him, and when Ember turned 18, Victor gave her a choice: leave voluntarily or be exiled publicly and hunted for sport. She left. She walked into the mountains with nothing but a backpack and a map, and she didn't look back. For 4 years, she survived. She taught herself everything: meteorology from a broken radio, medicine from stolen textbooks, topography from hand-drawn maps. She learned to read the wind to predict storms 3 days out. She learned to set snares, to skin rabbits, to render fat for candles. She learned 53 escape routes through the Rockies. She learned to disappear. And she convinced herself that she was safe. Ember opened her eyes. The fire had burned low. The silver wolf was still breathing. The pups were still asleep. She added another log to the fire and sat back down. The sun didn't rise so much as the sky turned a lighter shade of gray. The storm was still raging, but the wind had shifted. Ember could tell by the way the cabin groaned, the way the snow hit the windows at a different angle. She was making coffee when the silver wolf stirred. Ember froze her hand halfway to the pot. The wolf's eyes opened. Gold. Bright. Alert. And then the air shimmered. Ember took a step back as the wolf's body contorted. Bones cracked, fur receded, skin stretched and reformed. In less than 10 seconds, the wolf was gone. In her place was a woman. She was beautiful. Pale skin, silver hair that fell to her shoulders. High cheekbones, a strong jaw. She was naked, covered only by the blankets Ember had piled on her. The woman tried to sit up, but her face twisted in pain. She clutched her side where the stitches pulled tight against her skin. "Where?" she gasped. "Where are my babies?" Ember pointed to the laundry basket she'd lined with towels. The pups had shifted too. Two chubby toddlers with mops of white hair curled up together fast asleep. The woman's eyes filled with tears. She slumped back against the blankets, her chest heaving. "Thank the moon," she whispered. "Thank you." Ember stayed by the stove, gripping the edge of the counter. "You were dying on my doorstep. I couldn't just leave you." The woman looked at her, really looked at her. Her eyes were sharp, assessing. "You're an Omega," she said. It wasn't a question. Ember nodded. "And you dragged me inside. Alone. In a blizzard." "Yes." The woman stared at her for a long moment. Then she laughed. It was a weak, breathless sound, but it was genuine. "My name is Serafina," she said. "And you just saved the life of the Alpha King's sister." Ember's stomach dropped. "I know," she said quietly. "I saw the tattoo." Serafina's expression darkened. "Then you know he's coming. My brother doesn't leave family behind. Ever." "Who did this to you?" Ember asked. Serafina pulled the blanket aside, revealing the wound. It was angry and red, the stitches crude but holding. "My husband died 2 months ago," Serafina said, her voice hollow. "His second-in-command, a wolf named Garrett Stoneheart, decided he didn't want to wait for the succession. He wanted to kill the heirs." She gestured to the sleeping toddlers. Ash and Storm, 2 years old and already targeted for murder. "He chased us out of Ironwood territory. We've been running for 4 days. His mercenaries caught up to us yesterday. One of them had wolfsbane on his claws." Ember felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold. "And your brother?" "I tried to mind link him 3 days ago before we crossed into the mountains," Serafina said. "But the distance, the storm interference, I don't know if the message got through, if he's coming, or if he thinks we're already dead." She looked at Ember, her gold eyes desperate. "If Garrett's men find us here." And that's when the sound came. A boom. Not thunder, not the wind. The sound of something massive slamming into the front door. Ember screamed. Serafina scrambled backward, curling over her children to shield them. The heavy oak door bolted and reinforced groaned under the impact. Dust rained down from the ceiling. And then a voice roared from outside. It wasn't a human voice. It was layered, deep, guttural, a growl wrapped around human speech so loud it rattled the dishes in the cupboard. "Open the door." It was a command, an alpha command. The kind of voice that forced lesser wolves to their knees, that made their bones ache, and their wolves whimper in submission. Ember's knees buckled. Her Omega instincts screamed at her to submit, to bare her neck, to obey. She bit her tongue until she tasted blood. The pain cut through the fog of submission. She grabbed the shotgun from beside the door. Her hands were shaking so badly she nearly dropped it. "Go away," she screamed. "I'm armed." The voice roared back even louder. "I don't care if you have a goddamn cannon. You have my sister's scent inside. Open it, or I will bring this cabin down on top of you." Serafina gasped. "It's him. It's Thorn." Ember lowered the gun slightly. "Your brother?" "Yes, open it before he kills us all." Ember rushed to the door. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely grip the deadbolt. She slid it back, unlocked the latch. Before she could turn the handle, the door exploded inward. It didn't swing open. It was kicked with enough force to shatter the hinges. The heavy oak door flew across the room, slamming into the far wall with a deafening crash. Ember was thrown backward, landing hard on her tailbone. Pain shot up her spine, and the doorway filled with a monster. He was huge, at least 6'7", shoulders so broad they nearly touched both sides of the frame. He was covered in snow, wearing a shredded black shirt that clung to muscles that looked like they'd been carved from granite. His jeans were torn, his boots caked with ice. But it was his eyes that stopped Ember's heart. They were glowing, a violent burning crimson, alpha red. He scanned the room in a fraction of a second. He saw Serafina. He saw the pups. And then his eyes landed on Ember. He didn't see a savior. He didn't see someone who had spent the night saving his family. He saw a stranger standing over his injured sister. Covered in blood, he snarled. The sound was pure predatory rage. And then he lunged. Ember didn't have time to scream, his hand large enough to crush a melon wrapped around her throat. He lifted her off the ground as if she weighed nothing. Ember choked. She clawed at his wrist, her legs kicking uselessly in the air. His grip was like steel. The alpha command radiated off him in waves hot and suffocating. Submit. Die. Why do you smell like her blood? He roared into her face. His canines were elongated, sharp, and threatening. What did you do to them? Ember couldn't answer. She couldn't breathe. Black spots danced at the edges of her vision. Thorn, no. Seraphina was screaming. She was trying to drag herself upright, her face twisted in pain. She saved us. Put her down and she saved the babies. Thorn froze. The red in his eyes flickered. Beneath the crimson ember caught a glimpse of stormy gray irises. He looked at her, really looked at her. For the first time he saw the terror in her eyes. The way she was fighting not to kill him, but just to breathe. He saw how small she was, how thin, how her hands were covered in blood, not from violence, but from stitching wounds with fishing line. And he realized his hand was the only thing holding her up. He dropped her. Ember hit the floor hard. She curled into a ball, coughing violently as air rushed back into her bruised windpipe. She scrambled backward, crab-walking away from him, until her back hit the cabinets. Thorn stood there, his chest heaving. The rage was slowly receding, replaced by something else. Confusion. Shock. He looked at his hands, then at his sister. She saved you. His voice was rough, like gravel grinding together. Seraphina was sobbing. I was dying, Thorn. She dragged me through a blizzard. She stitched me up with a sewing needle. She gave the last of her milk to Ash and Storm. Thorn turned slowly to look at Ember. Ember couldn't meet his eyes. Her Omega instincts were screaming at her to look down, to hide. She curled into a tighter ball, wrapping her arms around her knees. Please, she whispered, her voice raspy from his chokehold. Just take them and go. Please don't hurt me. Thorn took a step toward her. Ember flinched, violently pressing herself harder against the cabinets. He stopped. For the first time in his life, the most powerful alpha in the territory looked at a trembling Omega on his floor and felt something he didn't recognize. Guilt. And underneath the guilt, something else. A pull. A magnetic snap in his chest. The scent of the cabin wasn't just sage and pine. It was her. And to his wolf, she smelled like the most intoxicating thing on earth. Frost-kissed evergreen and sun-warmed nectar. He slowly went down on one knee, lowering his head in a gesture of submission. Thorn started, his voice uncharacteristically soft. I apologize. Ember looked up wary. Her brown eyes were wide, her face pale. I thought you were one of Garrett's mercenaries, Thorn said. He reached out a hand but stopped short of touching her. You're hurt. I did that. I'll make it right. I'll live, Ember whispered. Just are they safe now? Thorn nodded. They are. And because you saved them, you are under my protection, whether you want it or not. Before Ember could respond, the roar of engines cut through the howling wind. Thorn's head snapped toward the shattered doorway. The crimson bled back into his eyes, turning them into burning coals. A low, terrifying growl rumbled deep in his chest. Garrett, Seraphina whispered, her face going pale. He found us. Thorn rose to his full height. In the firelight covered in snow and rage, he looked less like a man and more like a force of nature. He looked down at Ember. Stay inside, no matter what you hear. He stepped through the destroyed doorway and out into the blizzard. What followed was carnage. Through the window, Ember watched as Thorn's Silvercrest Alpha King and Legend tore through Garrett's mercenaries like they were made of paper. 4 snowmobiles, 5 armed men, silver bullets. None of it mattered. Thorn moved with inhuman speed, a backhand that crumpled a rifle like tinfoil, a throw that sent a mercenary flying 15 feet into a snowmobile, a roar that shook snow from the trees. But there were too many, and they were coordinated. While Thorn was distracted, a 5th figure emerged from the tree line behind the cabin. He carried a flare gun, and he was aiming at the cabin. No, Ember whispered. The man pulled the trigger. The flare screamed through the air, punching through the kitchen window, slamming into the wall of dry logs behind the stove. The timber caught instantly. Fire roared up the wall. Fire, Ember screamed. Seraphina, we have to move. Smoke filled the cabin faster than Ember thought possible. She grabbed the 2 toddlers, tucking one under each arm. Seraphina tried to stand, but her legs gave out. I can't, Seraphina gasped. Ember, I can't walk. Ember kicked open the back door just as the mercenary with the flare gun was reloading. He saw them, he grinned, he raised a pistol, and then a blur of shadow and fury tackled him from the side. Thorn, he'd heard Ember scream. He'd abandoned the fight to save them. He slammed the mercenary into a pine tree. There was a wet snap. The man went limp. Thorn turned to them, blood streaming from a graze on his temple. The truck, a mile down the logging road. Run. He scooped Serafina into his arms. Ember, can you carry the boys? Ember nodded, her arms already trembling. Stay close. We don't leave anyone behind. They ran. Behind them, Ember's sanctuary, her home for 4 years, was consumed by flames. The mile-long trek was a nightmare. Snow, thigh-deep. Ember fell twice, shielding the boys each time. Each time she fell, Thorn stopped, waited, refused to leave her behind. When they reached the massive black SUV, Ember collapsed into the back seat. Thorn deposited Serafina in the passenger seat, then vaulted into the driver's side. The engine roared to life. This is Alpha Thorn, he spoke into the comm system. Extraction is compromised. I have the package. Mobilize the Northern Guard. If Garrett's men cross the pack line, I want their heads on spikes. He glanced in the rearview mirror at Ember. She was shivering violently, soot smeared across her face. Turn on the seat warmers, he said softly. No one touches you now. You're with me. The drive took 2 hours. As they descended from the mountains, the blizzard softened. They were entering pack territory. The silence was thick. Why were you out there? Thorn asked suddenly. Ember jumped. What? A 22-year-old Omega doesn't live alone in a blizzard zone unless she has nowhere else to go. Who is your pack? Ember looked down at her hands. I don't have a pack. Everyone has a pack. I was dismissed from the Blackwood pack. Thorn's hands tightened on the wheel. Blackwood Alpha Victor Thornwell's territory. Ember flinched at the name. Yes, Victor is my stepfather. And he cast out his own stepdaughter. Why? Because I'm defective, Ember said. I can't shift fully. My wolf is weak. Victor said I was a waste of resources. He told the pack I died in a hunting accident. Told me to run and never come back. The car swerved slightly. He called you defective. It's true, Ember whispered. I'm small, I'm slow. You dragged a 100-pound wolf through a blizzard, Thorn said sharply. You stitched a wolfsbane wound with a sewing needle. You stood in front of a door with a shotgun to protect children that weren't yours. That is not weak, Ember. That is the bravest thing I have seen any wolf do in a decade. Victor Thornwell is a fool. Ember felt warmth bloom in her chest. Hope. Thank you, she whispered. Don't thank me. I nearly strangled you. You didn't know. I should have. Thorn's jaw clenched. I should have smelled. He cut himself off, rolled his window down, letting freezing air rush in. But the truth was the car was filled with a scent driving his wolf insane. Alpine wind and honeycomb. Sweet, calming, addictive, the scent of a mate. But Thorn pushed the thought down. She was terrified, traumatized. An Omega abused by alphas her whole life. If he claimed her now, she would only see it as another chain. He wouldn't do that to her. He would wait. The SUV turned onto a private road. Massive iron gates emblazoned with the Silver Fang crest swung open. They drove up a winding driveway lined with ancient oaks. At the top stood the estate. Stone walls, towering turrets, a fortress disguised as a mansion. Dozens of people waited on the steps. Guards, medical staff, older wolves in suits. Thorn stopped the car. Before Ember could move, he was opening her door. Leave the boys. I'll carry them. Ember slid out on legs that barely worked. Thorn lifted the sleeping twins with surprising tenderness. Medics rushed to help Serafina onto a gurney. Ember stood there uncertain, lost, and then she became aware of the stares. 50 pairs of eyes fixed on her. Curiosity, suspicion, wrinkled noses. She looked like a beggar, dirty, smelling of smoke, dressed in thrift store rags. A tall, elegant woman with severe black hair and ice-blue eyes stepped forward. Isolde Ravencroft, the pack matriarch, Thorn's aunt. She looked at Serafina with concern, then turned a cold gaze on Ember. Thorn, Isolde said, her voice like clipped glass. Serafina is being taken to the infirmary. But who is this? Why have you brought a rogue into the inner circle? Ember shrank back. Thorn's voice cut through the courtyard like a whip. Get the guest quarters ready. The East Wing. Now. Guest quarters, Isolde scoffed. For a rogue, surely the servants' wing. Isolde. The temperature dropped 10 degrees. Alpha power rolled off Thorn. He walked to Ember. He shifted the twins to one arm, and placed his free hand on the small of her back, a possessive gesture. Protective. "This is Ember Ashwood," Thorne declared, his voice ringing with authority. "She saved my sister. She saved my nephews. She is the reason the Silver Fang line continues tonight. She is a guest of the Alpha. Anyone who treats her with disrespect answers directly to me. Is that understood?" "Yes, Alpha," the crowd murmured. Isolde bowed stiffly. "Understood." Thorne looked down at Ember. "Come, you need food and rest." He guided her up the stairs. Ember felt the heat of his hand through her coat. For the first time in her life, she wasn't walking behind an Alpha. She was walking beside one. As they entered the grand foyer with its marble floors and crystal chandelier, Ember felt dizzy. "I don't belong here," she whispered. Thorne stopped. He leaned down, his lips close to her ear. "You're right," he murmured. "You don't belong to them, but you're here now, and I don't let go of things that are mine." Ember's breath caught. She looked up at him, searching his eyes, but he had already pulled away his face, a mask of command. "Show her to the blue suite," Thorne ordered a maid. "Bring her anything she asks for." As Ember was led away up the sweeping staircase, she looked back. Thorne was watching her, a king in his castle, but the look in his eyes wasn't kingly. It was hungry. Ember turned and climbed the stairs, her heart pounding. She had survived the blizzard. She had survived the mercenaries. But surviving the Alpha King's attention might be the hardest thing she ever had to do. Ember woke to sunlight and the smell of lavender. For a disorienting moment, she thought she was back in Victor's basement. Then she saw the silk curtains, the enormous room, the blue walls. She was in the blue suite. She was safe. Her body protested every movement. Bruises bloomed purple on her throat where Thorne's hand had been. Her shoulder throbbed, but she was alive. She swung her legs out of bed and realized she wasn't wearing her own clothes. Someone had changed her into oversized flannel pajamas. They smelled like thunderclouds and aged wood. They smelled like Thorne. A sharp knock made her jump. The door opened. Isolde Ravencroft swept in, heels clicking like gunshots. Behind her, a maid carried a silver tray. "Put it there, Beatrice," Isolde commanded, "and leave us." The maid scurried away. Isolde turned ice-blue eyes on Ember. "Let's not pretend," she began. "You performed a service. The Silver Fang Pack pays its debts." She pulled out a check, placed it on the nightstand. $80,000, enough to start a new life anywhere but here. Ember stared at the check. More money than she'd ever seen. Freedom. "I didn't do it for money," Ember said quietly. Isolde scoffed. "Everyone does things for money, dear. Look at you, a rogue, a defective Omega according to the background check I ran." Ember's stomach dropped. "You ran a background check?" "Of course. Victor Thornwell's stepdaughter, cast out at 18. No pack, no prospects." Isolde leaned in. "You don't belong in a royal pack. You are a liability. Thorne is grateful now, but gratitude fades. Soon he will realize you are just another mouth to feed." She straightened. "Take the money, Ember. Leave before Thorne returns from patrol. If you stay, the politics of this house will eat you alive." Ember felt the familiar sting of shame. Isolde sounded exactly like Victor. Useless, weak, a burden. Maybe she should just take the money and disappear. She reached for the check. "If she touches that check, Isolde, I will have you escorted off the property." The voice came from the doorway. Ember froze. Thorne was leaning against the doorframe. He'd showered and changed into a dark button-down that stretched across his shoulders. He walked into the room, eyes fixed on his aunt. "Thorne," Isolde stammered, "I was merely... You were trying to bribe my guest to leave." He picked up the check, ripped it into confetti, and let the pieces fall. "Ember is under my protection. That means she stays as long as she wants. If she leaves, it will be because she chooses to not, because she was bullied by a bitter old woman who forgets her place." Isolde's face turned purple. "I am trying to protect this family. Garrett is out there. We are at war." A low growl ripped from Thorne's chest. The windows rattled. Alpha Command hit like a physical force. Isolde's knees buckled. "Get out," Thorne said quietly. Isolde fled. The silence was heavy. Thorne stood in the middle of the room, chest heaving. Slowly the crimson faded from his eyes. He turned to Ember. Anger vanished, replaced by concern. "I apologize for her," he said stiffly. "She's right, though," Ember whispered. "I can't shift. I'm weak. In a war, I'm just a target." Thorne walked to the bed. He sat on the edge, the mattress dipping. He was so close she could smell him. Mountain storms and forest depth. It made her head spin. "I want you to see the pack doctor," Thorne said gently. Dr. Aldrich Moonshadow. He's the best in the state. Why, he can't fix a genetic defect. I saw you move yesterday, Ember. You dragged a 100-pound wolf through snow. You survived a chokehold from an alpha. That is not the physiology of a weak wolf. He leaned forward. I think someone has been lying to you your entire life, and I want to prove it. An hour later, Ember sat on an exam table in the estate's medical wing. The room was all white surfaces and gleaming equipment. Dr. Aldrich Moonshadow was a kind elderly beta with thick glasses. He'd run blood tests, scans of physical. He asked questions in a soft voice, never pushing. Thorne stood in the corner, arms crossed, watching like a hawk. Now Dr. Moonshadow was looking at a tablet, frowning. He took off his glasses. Well, Thorne demanded. Dr. Moonshadow looked up. His expression was grave. It's not a genetic defect, Alpha. Ember's heart stopped. What? It's poisoning. Silver nitrate and wolfsbane. Microdosed. Someone has been feeding you a suppressant cocktail since you were a child. It stunted your wolf's growth, prevented your shift, kept you physically weak. The room spun. Ember gripped the exam table. My stepfather, she whispered. Victor, he always made me drink a tonic. He said it was vitamins. He wasn't treating your condition, Dr. Moonshadow said softly. He was causing it. Thorne's hands clenched into fists. The air grew hot. Why? Ember cried. Why would he do that? Dr. Moonshadow hesitated. He looked at Thorne, who nodded. Because the doctor said carefully, looking at your genetic markers, you aren't a regular Omega Ember. You carry the recessive first bloodline alpha gene. Ember stared. What does that mean? It means, Thorne said, his voice tight with rage, that if you had come of age naturally, you would have been powerful. More powerful than Victor. Maybe more powerful than any alpha in Colorado. He was scared of you, Ember. A 5-year-old girl. So he poisoned you for 17 years to keep you weak. Something broke inside Ember's chest. All the years of shame. All the times she'd believed she was defective. It had all been a lie. Victor had made her believe she was nothing so she would never realize she was everything. Can it be reversed? Thorne asked. Yes, the doctor nodded. With the poison stopped, her system will flush it out. But it will be painful. When her wolf finally wakes up, it's going to be explosive. Thorne walked to Ember. She was crying silently. He reached out. This time he didn't stop. He cupped her face in his large hands, tilting her chin up. The touch sent electricity through her body. We will fix this, Thorne vowed, gray eyes burning, and then I will pay a visit to Victor Thornwell, and I will tear him apart piece by piece. Ember looked into his eyes and saw violence, but also safety. For the first time, she didn't pull away. She leaned into his touch. Thank you, she whispered. Thorne froze. His pupils dilated. Her sense spiked with gratitude, hit him like a drug. He wanted to kiss her, mark her, claim her, but the moment shattered. Whoop, whoop, whoop. Red emergency lights flashed. Breach perimeter, breach Sector 4. Thorne pulled away, face hardening. Sector 4, the servants' entrance. He looked at Ember. For a split second, she saw fear. Not for himself, for her. Stay here with Aldrich. Lock the door. Don't open it for anyone but me. Thorne, Ember called. He looked back. Be careful. He gave a grim nod. I am the King Ember. They are the ones who need to be careful. He vanished. The medical wing plunged into chaos. Dr. Moonshadow shoved a steel trolley against the door, hands shaking. Stay down, Ember. The Alpha's guard is the best. Nothing gets past them. But Ember could barely hear him. Her body was on fire. Not fever, inferno. The antidote Dr. Moonshadow had administered was working aggressively, stripping 20 years of poison from her blood. The reaction was agonizing. She curled on the tile floor, clutching her stomach. Her bones vibrated, grinding as if trying to rearrange. Let me out. The voice in her head wasn't a whisper. It was a roar. They are coming. Fight. Protect. For 22 years, her wolf had been a shadow. Now it was awake and furious. The lights died, pitch black, illuminated only by red emergency beacons. Boom! The steel door buckled. With a screech of tearing metal, it was kicked off its hinges. It flew across the room, slamming into a cabinet. Two figures stepped through the smoke. Massive, black tactical gear. Gas masks. Garrett's mercenaries. Where is she? The lead mercenary barked. This is a sterile facility, Dr. Moonshadow shouted. Get out! The mercenary didn't hesitate. He backhanded the doctor. The impact was sickening. Dr. Moonshadow crumpled unconscious. No, Ember screamed, trying to stand. Her legs gave out. The mercenary laughed. Cruel, hollow. He grabbed Ember by her hair, dragging her into the center of the room. Look at her. Pathetic. He yanked her head back. Victor wasn't lying when he said she was a waste of skin. Victor. The name detonated in Ember's mind. Fear evaporated, replaced by white-hot rage. The burning in her veins intensified. Not pain, power. He said to bring her in alive. The second mercenary said, pulling out zip ties. But he didn't say uninjured. He reached for her. Don't, Ember whispered. Her voice sounded strange, layered, guttural, not human. What did you say, Mutt? He grabbed her arm. Ember looked up. Her eyes, usually soft brown, were gone. In their place burned luminous, terrifying violet, the color of royalty, the mark of a first bloodline alpha female. I said, Ember snarled, don't touch me. The shift hit like a thunderclap. No slow transition. Her body contorted, bones snapping and reforming in an instant. The pajamas shredded. The mercenaries stumbled back, terror in their eyes. Standing before them was not a small girl. It was a massive wolf, deep, rich, russet red, the color of dried blood and autumn leaves. She stood nearly as tall as a male alpha, paws the size of dinner plates tipped with claws like curved knives, eyes burning violet fire. The russet wolf didn't bark. She roared. The sound shook windows. Medical equipment rattled. Fluorescent lights flickered. She lunged. The first mercenary raised his rifle. Too slow. Her jaws clamped around the barrel, crushing metal like foil. She swiped him across the chest. He flew backward, smashing into a cabinet. Blood sprayed across white walls. The second mercenary turned to run. The predator was already there. She pinned him to the floor, massive paws on his chest. A low rumble vibrated through the room, shaking dust from the ceiling. She leaned down, fangs inches from his throat. Saliva dripped onto his mask. The mercenary whimpered. A grown man, a trained killer, reduced to a terrified child. Suddenly the doorway filled with a dark presence. Thorne stood there, covered in soot and blood. Claws extended, dripping crimson. Chest heaving. He took in the scene, the unconscious doctor, the terrified mercenary, the destroyed bay, and the magnificent red beast. Thorne's heart stopped, then hammered. His wolf went feral, howling one word through every cell, mate. The russet wolf turned her massive head. Violet eyes met crimson. For a tense second, death hung in the air. She was feral, drunk on power and rage. Then recognition softened her gaze. She whined, low, submissive, impossible from something so deadly. And then she stumbled. Adrenaline faded. The shift reversed as suddenly as it came. Bones cracked. Fur receded. Thorne moved faster than thought. He caught Ember as she collapsed back to human form, wrapping his tactical vest around her shivering naked body. He lifted her against his chest, cradling her like she weighed nothing. He buried his face in her neck, inhaling. The scent was overwhelming. Frost-kissed evergreen and sun-warmed nectar, but underneath, unmistakable. Mate. His mate. I killed him, Ember whispered, trembling. Her voice was hoarse. Thorne, I think I killed him. Thorne looked at the mercenary slumped against the cabinet, breathing, barely, but alive. You defended yourself, Thorne murmured, awe in his voice. He pulled back just enough to look at her face. My gods, Ember, you're magnificent. Ember's violet eyes were fading to brown but wide with shock. What was that? What happened to me? Your wolf woke up, Thorne said, voice thick with emotion. Your true wolf, first bloodline. You're not just an Omega Ember. You're an alpha female. One of the rarest, most powerful wolves alive. He pressed his forehead to hers. You're a queen. But triumph was short-lived. Jax Thorne's lieutenant burst in. The beta was covered in blood, face pale. Alpha, Jax gasped. We secured the perimeter, but we found something at the gate. Thorne looked up, arms tightening around Ember. What? Jax held up a phone, hand shaking. It's playing a video on loop. From Victor. Thorne felt blood drain from his face. Jax turned the phone. The video showed a concrete room, cold, dark. In the center, bound to a chair with heavy chains, was Seraphina. Gagged, face bruised, blood dripping from a cut above her eye. Standing behind her, holding a silver knife to her throat, was Victor Thornwell, Ember's stepfather, older, grayer, but the same cold, calculating eyes. Hello, Thorne, Victor's voice sneered. I believe I have something of yours, and you have something of mine. The knife pressed tighter. A thin line of blood appeared on Seraphina's throat. My stepdaughter for your sister. You have 24 hours to arrange the exchange. Come alone to the coordinates I'm sending. If you bring your army, I'll cut her throat and send you the pieces." Victor leaned closer to the camera, smile vicious. "And tell Ember I said hello. Tell her daddy misses her." The video looped. Thorne stood there, Ember trembling in his arms, staring at the screen. The battle at the gates was over. But the war had just begun. Ember looked up at Thorne. She saw the conflict tearing him apart. His sister, his mate. But Ember Ashwood had spent 4 years surviving because she refused to be weak. She placed a hand on Thorne's chest over his beating heart. "I have a plan," she said quietly. Thorne looked down, gray eyes searching her face. "They're expecting a terrified, broken Omega," Ember continued, voice growing stronger. "They're expecting a victim. They have no idea what I've become." She felt her wolf stir, not dormant, not silent, awake. "So let's give them what they want," Ember said, brown eyes flashing violet fire. "Let them think they've won, because they have no idea that the defective girl's bringing the russet wolf to their doorstep." Thorne looked at his mate, at the woman who had opened her door to save strangers, who had become a queen in a day. A dark, dangerous smile spread across his face. "Very well," he vowed. "We meet them at dawn, and God help anyone standing in our way." The countdown had begun, 24 hours until the exchange. 24 hours to plan a war. And Ember Ashwood, who had spent her whole life being told she was nothing, was about to show the world exactly what a first bloodline alpha queen could do. The war room of the Silver Fang estate was a cavernous space of stone and steel. A massive table dominated the center, covered in maps, satellite images, and tactical displays. 20 of Thorne's most trusted wolves surrounded it. Beta Caspian Ironforge, his head of security. Jax, his lieutenant. Isolde, despite her earlier transgression. And others whose loyalty had been proven in blood. And at Thorne's right hand, wearing borrowed clothes that were still too big, stood Ember. She shouldn't have been there. Every wolf in that room knew it. She was a rogue, an outsider. Someone who, by all rights, should have been in the servants' quarters, not standing beside the Alpha King like an equal. But Thorne had made it clear. She stays. She speaks. And anyone who questions it answers to him. Victor's message came with coordinates, Thorne said, pointing to a location on the map. Abandoned mining facility, Eagle County, 60 miles southwest, right on the border of Blackwood territory. "It's a trap," Caspian said immediately. The grizzled Beta had scars across his face from 100 battles. "He'll have the high ground, multiple escape routes, and enough firepower to level a city block." "Of course it's a trap," Thorne replied. "The question is, how do we spring it in our favor?" "We don't go," Isolde said coldly. "Serafina is one wolf. We are talking about the Alpha King walking into enemy territory with a target on his back." Thorne's eyes flashed crimson. "She's my sister." "She's already dead," Isolde said bluntly. "Victor Thornwell doesn't take hostages to negotiate. He takes them to lure you into a kill box." The room erupted. Half the wolves agreed with Isolde's pragmatism. The other half were loyal enough to Thorne that they'd follow him into hell itself. "Enough!" Ember's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. Every head turned to her. She stepped forward, placing both hands on the table. Her fingers traced the map, following roads and terrain with the precision of someone who had spent 4 years mapping escape routes through the Rockies. "Victor doesn't want to kill Thorne," Ember said quietly. "Not yet. He wants leverage." "What kind of leverage?" Jax asked. Ember looked up, meeting Thorne's eyes. "Me. He wants me back. Not because he cares, but because I'm a loose end, a witness to 17 years of poisoning, child abuse, and my mother's murder. As long as I'm alive and free, I'm a threat to him." She turned to address the room. "But here's what Victor doesn't know. He doesn't know I can shift now. He doesn't know about the first bloodline. He still thinks I'm the defective Omega he threw away 4 years ago." Thorne's eyes narrowed. "You're saying we use that?" "Yes." Ember pointed to the mining facility on the map. "We give him exactly what he expects. A broken girl, hands bound, looking like she's been dragged here against her will. He'll be so focused on gloating, on proving to everyone that he was right about me, that he won't see the real threat until it's too late." "The real threat being you," Caspian said slowly. "And 200 of your finest soldiers hidden in the ridgeline," Ember added. "Victor will have mercenaries, maybe 50, 60 at most. He can't field more than that without drawing attention from the other packs. But if you surround the facility from all sides, box them in, we control the battlefield," Thorne finished. A slow, predatory smile spread across his face. "You're a tactician." "I'm a survivor," Ember corrected. "I've spent 4 years planning for the day Victor came looking for me. I know how he thinks. I know his weaknesses." Isolde leaned forward, ice blue eyes sharp. And what's to stop him from simply shooting Serafina the moment he sees our forces? Ember met her gaze steadily. Because I'll be standing right next to her. Victor won't risk killing me in the crossfire. Not until he's had his moment of triumph. Not until he's proven to everyone watching that he was right to cast me out. Everyone watching, Jax frowned. You think he'll make this public? I know he will, Ember said. Victor doesn't do anything quietly. He'll have witnesses, probably other members of the conspiracy Thorne mentioned. He'll want them to see the Alpha King brought low. To see me humiliated. It's not enough for him to win. He needs everyone to know he won. Thorne was staring at her with something that looked like awe. You've thought this through. I've had 4 years to think it through, Ember replied. Every night in that cabin, I planned for the day I'd face him again. I just never thought I'd have an army at my back when I did it. The room fell silent. The wolves exchanged glances. Slowly, one by one, they began to nod. It could work, Caspian admitted grudgingly. If we position snipers on the ridgeline infantry in the valley approaches and a rapid response team in the tunnels. There are tunnels, Thorne interrupted. Ember nodded. Old mine shafts. I studied the geological surveys when I was teaching myself topography. There are at least 3 access points within 100 yards of the main facility. They're probably collapsed or flooded, but if we clear them, we can insert a strike team directly beneath Victor's position, Thorne said, excitement building in his voice. Ember, you're brilliant. She felt her face flush. I just don't want anyone else to die because of me. No one is dying, Thorne said firmly, except Victor Thornwell and anyone stupid enough to stand with him. The next 20 hours were a blur of preparation. Ember worked alongside Thorne and his tactical team, refining the plan down to the minute. She drew maps from memory marking every trail, every canyon, every potential sniper position within 5 miles of the mining facility. Caspian was impressed despite himself. You really did memorize the entire region. When you're alone and hunted, you learn the land, or you die, Ember replied simply. Soldiers mobilized. Weapons were distributed. Silver bullets, wolfsbane grenades for the mercenaries who wouldn't shift, and traditional steel for wolves who would. Through it all, Thorne stayed close to Ember. Not hovering, but present. A steady, solid presence that made her feel less like she was walking into a nightmare and more like she was walking into a battle she could win. Late that night, with only 6 hours until dawn, Ember found herself alone in the war room. Everyone else had gone to prepare to rest, to make their peace with what was coming. She stood over the maps, tracing the route they would take. The road that would lead her back to Victor. Back to the man who had poisoned her, killed her mother, and stolen 17 years of her life. You should be sleeping. Thorne's voice came from the doorway. He entered quietly, closing the door behind him. I can't, Ember admitted. Every time I close my eyes, I see him. I see the basement where he locked me when I misbehaved. I see my mother's face the night before she died. Thorne crossed the room to stand beside her. You don't have to do this, you know. I can send a team to extract Serafina. You can stay here safe. No. Ember's voice was firm. I need to face him. I need him to see what I've become. What he tried to destroy, but couldn't. Thorne was quiet for a moment. Then slowly he reached out and took her hand. His palm was warm, rough, with calluses from years of training and fighting. When this is over, he said quietly, when Victor is dead and Serafina is safe, I want you to know that you have a choice. Ember looked up at him confused. A choice? You can stay here, as my guest, as a member of this pack, or... He hesitated, and for the first time since she'd met him, the fearsome Alpha King looked uncertain. Or as something more, if you want. Ember's heart stuttered. Thorne, I know what I am to you, he continued, the words tumbling out now, like he was afraid if he stopped he'd never say them. I'm the Alpha who nearly strangled you, who represents everything you've been running from. I'm not asking you to decide now. I'm not asking you to feel something you don't. I just need you to know that when I look at you, I don't see a defective Omega. I see my equal, my partner, my... He stopped himself, jaw clenching. But Ember understood. She'd felt it too. The pull, the connection, the way her wolf, newly awakened and fierce, went quiet and content in his presence. Your mate, she finished softly. Thorne's gray eyes widened. You know, I've read enough about wolf bonds to recognize the signs, Ember said. The scent, the pull, the way I feel safe for the first time in my life when you're near me. And, Thorne asked, voice rough, how do you feel about that? Ember was quiet for a long moment. She looked down at their joined hands. his so large and powerful scarred from 100 battles. Hers small and delicate, stained with ink, from drawing maps and still bearing the faint marks of Victor's cruelty. I feel terrified, she admitted. Every alpha I've ever known has hurt me. Victor, the pack enforcers who looked the other way, while he abused me, the wolves who called me defective and useless. Part of me wants to run, to disappear into the mountains again and never let anyone close enough to hurt me. Thorn's hand tightened on hers, not painful but grounding. And the other part knows that you're not them, Ember said, looking up to meet his eyes. You apologized when you hurt me. You defended me to your own pack. You are asking me what I want instead of telling me what I should do. That's not something alphas do, at least not the alphas I've known. I'm not a perfect man, Ember, Thorn said quietly. I have a temper. I'm possessive. I'll want to protect you even when you don't need protecting, and I'll probably drive you insane with how overprotective I can be. But, Ember prompted, but I will never ever make you feel small. Thorn vowed, his voice fierce. I will never poison you, cage you, or tell you that you're anything less than extraordinary. And if you choose me, if you decide to give us a chance, I will spend every day proving that an alpha can be a partner, not a prison. Ember felt tears prick her eyes. I want to believe that. Then let me show you, Thorn said. He lifted their joined hands, pressing his lips to her knuckles in a gesture so gentle it made her heart ache. After tomorrow, after we end Victor and save Seraphina, let me court you properly. Let me prove that I can be what you need. And if I'm not ready, Ember whispered, if I need time, then I wait, Thorn said simply. A week, a month, a year, however long it takes, you're worth waiting for, Ember Ashwood. For the first time in 4 years, Ember let herself imagine a future. Not just survival, but life. Not just existing, but living. With a pack. With a home. With someone who saw her not as broken, but as whole. With Thorn. Ask me again after tomorrow, she said softly. When Victor is dead and I'm free. Really free. Ask me then. Thorn nodded, a small smile tugging at his lips. I will. He released her hand, but not before giving it one last squeeze. Try to get some rest. Dawn comes early, and we have a war to win. As he turned to leave, Ember called out, Thorn. He looked back. Thank you, she said, for seeing me, the real me, not the defective Omega Victor created, but the person I actually am. I will always see you, Ember, Thorn replied. Always. And then he was gone, leaving Ember alone with her maps and her thoughts, and for the first time in years, hope. Dawn broke cold and clear over the Colorado Rockies. The convoy assembled in the estate's courtyard. 10 armored vehicles, each carrying 20 soldiers. 200 of Silver Fang's finest, armed to the teeth and ready for war. Ember stood beside Thorn's SUV, dressed in simple clothes designed to look worn and shabby. Her hands were bound in front of her loosely so she could slip free in seconds, but convincingly enough to fool Victor. Thorn approached, his expression grim. He looked every inch the warrior king dressed in tactical gear weapons strapped to his body. Last chance to back out, he said quietly. Ember shook her head. I'm ready. Thorn nodded. Then in full view of 200 soldiers, he did something unexpected. He cupped her face in his hands and pressed his forehead to hers. A gesture of respect, of partnership, of equals. Come back to me, he murmured low enough that only she could hear. We have unfinished business, you and I. I will, Ember promised. The drive took 90 minutes. As they approached Eagle County, the landscape grew more desolate. Abandoned mines dotted the hillsides, their entrances dark and foreboding. The mining facility came into view, a cluster of rusted buildings surrounding a massive pit, exactly as Ember had described. And surrounding it, as predicted, were Victor's forces. She counted 50 mercenaries, maybe 60, all armed, all positioned to defend the facility. But they were looking in the wrong direction. They expected Thorn to come from the main road, guns blazing. They didn't expect him to already have soldiers in the hills, in the tunnels, surrounding them from all sides. The convoy stopped a quarter-mile from the facility. Thorn exited first, then personally opened Ember's door. To anyone watching, it looked like he was extracting a prisoner. Showtime, he murmured. Ember took a deep breath and stepped out into the cold morning air, and walked hands bound and head down toward the man who had destroyed her childhood. Toward Victor Thornwell, toward her reckoning. The mining facility loomed ahead, its rusted structures casting long shadows in the early morning light. Ember walked slowly, deliberately, her bound hands held in front of her. Behind her, Thorn followed at a careful distance, playing the role of captor, bringing a prisoner to exchange. Victor stood in the center of the compound, flanked by 30 mercenaries. And there, chained to a metal post, was Serafina. Her silver hair was matted with blood, her face bruised, but her eyes were alert, alive. When Victor saw Ember, his face split into a cruel smile. "There she is," he called out, his voice echoing across the empty space. "My dear stepdaughter, you've caused me quite a bit of trouble, girl." Ember said nothing. She kept her eyes down, her shoulders hunched, the perfect picture of a broken Omega. Victor gestured to 5 other men standing beside him, older alphas all dressed in expensive suits despite the desolate location. "Gentlemen, may I present the defective Omega I told you about, the one who ran away 4 years ago rather than face her rightful punishment for being useless. The Six Fangs, the council of corrupt alphas who controlled the Colorado territory through trafficking, extortion, and murder." "She doesn't look like much of a threat," one of them said, a heavy-set alpha with a scarred face. "Garrett Stoneheart, the one who had tried to kill Serafina and her children." "That's because she isn't," Victor laughed. "Never was. Weak bloodline, defective wolf. I wasted 17 years trying to make something useful out of her, but some wolves are just born broken." Ember felt the old shame try to rise up, but she pushed it down. She knew the truth now. She knew what she was. Thorn stepped forward, his voice cold and commanding. "I brought her. Now release my sister." "Not yet," Victor said, pulling a silver knife from his belt. He pressed it against Serafina's throat. "First, I want to hear her beg. I want to hear little Ember apologize for running away, for being an ungrateful whelp after everything I did for her." This was it, the moment Victor needed, his moment of triumph. Ember slowly raised her head, met his eyes, and smiled. "You want me to beg?" she asked, her voice steady and clear. "You want me to apologize?" Victor frowned, confused by her tone. "Yes, on your knees, now." "No," Ember said simply, and then she shifted. The transformation was instantaneous. Her bound hands snapped the ropes like thread. Her body contorted, bones cracking and reforming. The shabby clothes shredded, and standing where the defective Omega had been was the russet wolf, massive, powerful, eyes burning violet. Victor's face went white. "What? How? You poisoned me for 17 years. Ember's voice rumbled from the wolf's throat, layered and terrible. "You killed my mother. You trafficked innocent Omegas. And you thought you'd broken me." She took a step forward. The mercenaries raised their weapons but hesitated. This wasn't what they'd signed up for. "But you didn't break me, Victor. You just taught me to survive." And now, Thorn's howl split the morning air. And 200 Silver Fang soldiers rose from their positions, from the ridgelines, from the tunnels, from behind every rock and building. They had been there all along. The trap had been sprung, but not on Thorn, on Victor. "Now you face justice," Ember finished. Chaos erupted. Victor's mercenaries, realizing they were surrounded and outgunned, began to surrender immediately. Weapons clattered to the ground. Hands went up. But the Six Fangs tried to run. Garrett Stoneheart shifted into his massive black wolf and lunged at Serafina, clearly intending to kill the hostage out of spite. He never made it. The russet wolf was faster. She intercepted him mid-leap, her jaws closing around his throat. There was a wet crack. Garrett's body hit the ground and didn't move. The other members of the Six scattered, but Caspian's soldiers were everywhere. They were rounded up within minutes, forced to their knees, weapons stripped away. Only Victor remained standing. He was backing away, slowly, silver knife still in his hand, looking for an escape route that didn't exist. Ember shifted back to human form. Caspian immediately threw a blanket around her shoulders. She walked toward Victor, slowly, deliberately. Behind her, Thorn and a dozen soldiers formed a protective wall, but they didn't interfere. This was her moment. "You're not defective," Victor spat, but his voice was shaking. "You can't be. The tests, the bloodlines—" "The tests you faked," Ember said quietly. "The bloodline you suppressed with poison. Did you know what I really am, Victor, or were you just so paranoid that you poisoned me on the chance I might be a threat?" Victor's hand tightened on the knife. "You were always a threat, from the moment you were born. Your mother knew it too. That's why she was going to take you and run." Ember stopped. "What?" "She found my records," Victor said, a manic laugh bubbling up. "Found out about the trafficking network. Found out I'd been testing your blood saw, the first bloodline markers. She was going to expose me and take you to the Alliance for protection." His face twisted with rage. "So I killed her, made it look like an accident. And I kept you here, kept you weak, because as long as you were the pathetic, defective Omega everyone believed you were, no one would ever look twice at you. No one would ever know what you could become. You murdered her to protect yourself, Ember said, her voice breaking. She was your mate, the mother of your... She wasn't my mate, Victor snarled. She was a means to an end, a way to take control of the Blackwood pack, and you were just a loose end I should have killed years ago. He raised the knife, but he never got the chance to throw it. Thorne moved with blinding speed, his hand closing around Victor's wrist. There was a sickening snap. Victor screamed. The knife fell to the ground. You don't get to threaten her, Thorne said quietly, his voice deadly calm. Not ever again. He released Victor's broken wrist and stepped back, allowing Silver Fang's soldiers to restrain him. Ember stood there shaking as the truth of her mother's death settled over her. All these years she'd believed it was an accident, that her mother had simply been unlucky. But it was murder, premeditated, cold-blooded. Ember. Thorne was beside her, his hand gentle on her shoulder. It's over. He can't hurt you anymore. He needs to pay, Ember whispered, for my mother, for all the Omegas he trafficked, for everything. He will, Thorne promised, but not here, not like this. We do this right, public trial, full evidence, every crime documented and witnessed. Ember looked up at him. You promise, I promise, Thorne said. Victor Thornwell will face justice, the real kind, the kind that can't be buried or forgotten. 3 days later, the Northwest Alliance convened in Denver. The Grand Hall was packed with over 300 witnesses. Alphas, Betas, Omegas from 47 packs across Colorado and Wyoming. Representatives from the Alliance Council. Elders who had presided over pack law for decades. And in the center, chained with silver and flanked by guards, were Victor Thornwell and the 4 surviving members of the Six Fangs. The trial lasted 6 hours. Thorne presented the evidence first. Financial records showing $73 million in illegal profits from logging, mining, and trafficking, offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. Wire transfers bearing the 6's signatures. Then came the victims, 23 Omegas rescued from the abandoned mine where they'd been held for the breeding program. They testified one by one about the abuse, the forced matings, the children taken from them. And Ember watched Victor's face as they spoke. He showed no remorse, no shame, only anger that he'd been caught. When it was Ember's turn to testify, the hall went silent. She stood before the Council of 7 elders, her voice steady and clear. Victor Thornwell poisoned me for 17 years, she began. From the age of 5 until I escaped at 18. He did this to suppress my wolf, to keep me weak and controllable. He did this because he murdered my mother, Era Ashwood, when she discovered his crimes and planned to expose him. She pulled out a small vial from her pocket. This is the vitamin tonic he forced me to drink every day. Dr. Aldrich Moonshadow analyzed it. It contains wolfsbane and silver nitrate in precise doses, enough to suppress a wolf's abilities without killing the host. She set the vial on the evidence table. Victor Thornwell is guilty of murder, child abuse, poisoning, and conspiracy, and he deserves to face the full consequences of his actions. The elders deliberated for 30 minutes. When they returned, Grand Elder Lysander Stormwind spoke. Victor Thornwell, the council finds you guilty on 63 counts, including murder, conspiracy, trafficking, assault, and abuse of power. You are hereby sentenced to life imprisonment in a silver-lined cell in the Alaska Territory, where you will remain until your natural death. Victor lunged against his chains, screaming, You can't do this. I am an alpha. I have rights. You have no rights, Lysander said coldly. You forfeited them when you trafficked innocent wolves for profit, when you murdered your mate to protect your crimes, when you poisoned a child for 17 years. He turned to the other members of the 6. The rest of you are sentenced to permanent exile in the Arctic territories, all titles stripped, all assets forfeited. $73 million will be redistributed to your victims. The gavel came down. Justice had been served. As Victor was dragged away, still screaming, Ember felt something break loose in her chest, a weight she'd been carrying for 4 years. He couldn't hurt her anymore. He couldn't hurt anyone anymore. Thorne found her in the hallway afterward, tears streaming down her face. It's over, he said softly, pulling her into his arms. It's over, she repeated, her voice muffled against his chest. And for the first time in her life, Ember Ashwood was truly free. The epilogue came 6 months later. The Silver Fang estate was decorated with thousands of white flowers and silver ribbons. 500 guests filled the grounds, alphas, betas, omegas from across the territory, all gathered to witness the mating ceremony of their king. Ember stood in the bridal suite looking at herself in the mirror. The white dress was simple but elegant, fitted at the waist and flowing to the floor. Her hair, no longer tangled and unkempt, fell in soft waves around her shoulders. but it was her eyes that drew attention. They still flashed violet when her emotions ran high, a permanent mark of her first bloodline heritage. Serafina appeared in the doorway, fully healed and radiant. Ready, Ember nodded. Ready. The ceremony took place at sunset on the same granite overlook where Ember's cabin had once stood. Thorn had built a memorial there, a simple stone marker that read, "Where one Omega opened a door and changed a kingdom." Thorn waited at the altar dressed in traditional ceremonial clothes. When he saw Ember walking toward him, his breath caught. The ceremony was simple. Traditional vows, the exchange of silver bands, and then witnessed by 500 wolves, Thorn's claiming bite on Ember's neck. The mark that declared to the world, "She is mine. I am hers. We are equals. We are one." The celebration lasted until dawn, but as the sun rose over the Rockies, Thorn and Ember slipped away to the memorial site. They stood together, looking out over the valley where it had all begun. "I have news," Ember said quietly. Thorn looked at her, eyebrows raised. "I'm pregnant. Twins." For a moment, Thorn just stared. Then a smile broke across his face, wild and genuine and full of joy. "Twins," he repeated. He pulled her close, one hand coming to rest on her still flat stomach. "A boy and a girl." "Dr. Moonshadow thinks so," Ember confirmed. "They'll be so loved," Thorn murmured. "So protected. So free." Ember leaned into him, watching the sunrise paint the snow gold and pink. She thought about the reforms they'd passed in the last 6 months. The Omega Protection Act, the trafficking laws with death penalty consequences, the mandatory Omega representatives on every pack council. She thought about the 350 Omegas who had enrolled in the education programs she'd helped create, the safe houses, the abuse hotlines. She thought about how different the world was becoming, how much safer, and she thought about the frightened girl who had opened her cabin door in a blizzard, never knowing it would lead to all of this, to love, to power, to purpose. "What are you thinking?" Thorn asked. Ember smiled. "I'm thinking that I opened my door to save strangers, and I found my pack. I found myself. I found you." "And," Thorn prompted. "And I became the queen who proves that Omegas were never weak," Ember said. "We were just waiting for someone to stop poisoning us and let us rise." Thorn pressed a kiss to her temple. "You didn't just rise, my love. You soared." They stood together as the sun climbed higher, painting the world in shades of hope and promise. Ember Ashwood, once called, defective, once told she was worthless, now stood as Alpha Queen of the Silver Fang Pack, first bloodline. Omega advocate of the Northwest Alliance, mother-to-be, mate to the king, and most importantly free. The russet wolf had risen, and the world would never be the same.